What's happening, YouTube? Eric Bauer. As if you didn't know, back again, and it has been some time. Turn down the tunes a little bit. What has it been, like 2 months? Maybe more since my last upload, when I said I'm going to do this more regularly. And not keeping my fucking word. That's what happens. Just had a lot on my plate with the holidays and being sick. Got real sick for a while. Not that any of you really need to hear any stories about that. And then just no motivation to do anything YouTube related, really, to be totally honest. In fact, I've kind of been staying away outside of a few videos here and there that I'm watching. Haven't done a lot of commenting or interacting. Just kind of distanced myself a little bit. No reason why. I don't know. I guess I've kind of gotten tired of the same old formula, talking about same old fucking music. Feel like a change is in order. So there can be some new things coming up on the channel. And as I say every time, I'm going to try and do these things more regularly. For real, though. And I'm going to switch it up with content. Still talk about music, but one of the things I really want to talk about it's fucking movies. If any of you have bothered to look back at the blog that I've got linked on my YouTube page here, that has been there since I started this channel. I used to focus solely on music and movies, and mostly movies. I can talk endlessly about film. It doesn't matter if it's cheap exploitation, B horror, fucking action, whether it's like actually impeccably done or fucking canon ripoffs, thrillers, drama. I love movies as long as they don't suck, which generally means that I have to exclude movies made after like 1990 because the current Hollywood machine churns out nothing but sequels, reboots, and fucking superhero movies. That shit's fucking boring. Anyway, so expect some shit along those lines coming up. Probably my next video, to be totally honest. This current video that I'm going to do today is going to be focusing on something that I haven't really talked about in a while. I have shown some records of this ilk in the past, usually just with like fucking collection updates, but I haven't done a proper collection update in who knows how long. If it's been 2 months since my last video, it's been at least 6 months since an actual collection update proper, as it were. So today, I'm going to talk about fucking soundtracks. None of these are anything that I've shown during the life of this fucking channel. At least to my knowledge. If I have, and you catch me in a fib, call me out on it. Down below in the comments. I always say, we'll go out of my way to try and respond. To all the comments you guys leave. Anyway, almost 5 minutes into this fucking video, and I haven't shown a thing. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, we're going to start. We're going to show some soundtracks. We start pretty strong. And you'd have to be living under a rock not to have noticed that like the whole soundtrack craze is fucking taken off. You got specialty labels like fucking Waxwork, One Way Static, and fucking Mondo. And I honestly kind of attribute this record to being one of the starting places for the current soundtrack chase that a lot of fucking record collectors are on. I'm talking about Beyond the Black Rainbow by Sinuoya Caves. Consists of fucking Jeremy Schmidt, who was in Black Mountain, a band that I'm not familiar with, but I am very familiar with this record. Listen to the shit out of this record. Now, if you haven't seen Beyond the Black Rainbow, it's a film that came out a few years back, 2014, maybe 2013. Nothing inside the record other than that gatefold and a very nice, clear record. Beyond the Black Rainbow, as I was saying, directed by Panos Cosmatos, who is the son of George P. Cosmatos, a name that might not mean anything to a lot of you, but to some of you, George directed fucking Rambo First Blood Part 2, Cobra, and a little movie called Of Unknown Origin, which stars Peter Weller in one of my favorite roles that he's ever been in a film. As far as this record goes, Sonoya Caves, they sound a lot like Zombie, Steve Moore type shit. So if you're familiar with like Steve Moore's soundtrack to The Guest or the movie Cub, you're kind of going to get something of that ilk here. There are definite winks at like 70s Italo, disco, and fucking progressive rock, a la Goblin, Claudio Simonetti, that kind of shit. Also very indebted to the likes of Tangerine Dream, obviously, Carpenter and Howard. Not so much Fabio Frizzi. I've heard that thrown into the bag with kind of describing the sound, but I don't hear it. Anyway, that's the first one. I've had that for years. Fucking love the shit out of that record. And the movie is fucking fantastic. It is a mind fuck that it needs to be seen. If you love fucking like throwback sci-fi, this music's kind of loud, right? Kind of throwback sci-fi, trippy sort of 70s movies like fucking Blue Sunshine, Beyond the Black Rainbow is probably for you, and I would not hesitate to recommend it. So the next soundtrack we've got, soundtrack to Wolf Cop. Its packaging rules, first of all. This soundtrack is composed by the band Shooting Guns. Comes on a single green tape. It's hilarious that there's just a single tape in that giant fucking VHS clamshell. This was released by One Way Static 2014, I want to say. Also released on vinyl. But I peeped this in the record store probably about not too long after it came out, and I fucking had to snag it. Just like I said, based off of this packaging. It's awesome. As far as what this sounds like, Shooting Guns, they're like a psychedelic stoner band, except, I mean, imagine fucking, say like a krautrock band like Nui, on that side of the spectrum, as opposed to like the Tangerine Dream or Popolvuh section. Intersecting with like Hawkwind and fucking Electric Wizard, and that's kind of what this is going to sound like. It's fucking awesome. The tracks are all killer. A lot of tracks on here, actually. They're all pretty short. And the cues are great. If you watch the movie, and if you can't figure out what the movie's about, look at the title, look at the cover. It's about a werewolf cop. It's awesome. Fucking the cues for the soundtrack perfectly gel with the movie, the soundtrack itself. It's awesome. There's not much more I can say about it besides that. This next one is probably one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. This is Fabio Frizzi doing City of the Living Dead. The Lucio Fulci movie from 1981. This came out, this is a reissue, on fucking Stella 2014, I want to say. Really fucking nice reissue. Original artwork, which kudos for that shit. Mondo, they do some nice work, but I fucking do not like. Nice poster. Came with another poster actually, which is on the wall, so I can't show it. But I mean, whatever. Poster doesn't really, you know. It's not why you fucking listen to a record. At least it shouldn't be. Came with a really nice blue vinyl, which is really goes well with the fucking cover art. Let me pull that out again for you fucking colored wax nerds. Anyway, so much shit has been said about Fabio Frizzi and his soundtracks. Notoriously a very long-running collaborator with Lucio Fulci, did the soundtracks for Zombie as well as The Beyond, I want to say. I might be wrong. There was one or two Fulci movies that a lot of people attribute as being Frizzi, but actually aren't. This is one of them that is, and it's fucking fantastic. As far as the music goes, you know, a lot of people would say throw him in that Goblin sort of umbrella, which isn't too far off the mark. I think he's a bit more progressive sounding than Goblin, though, and shares a lot in common with shit like fucking Atomic Rooster, just for want of a, or lack of a better band to fucking compare him to. Really great, really atmospheric. Fucking, it goes from like groovy and amped up to like just this overwhelming, foreboding tracks that consist of nothing but like ambience and drones. Really good stuff. Perfectly fitting for the movie. In fact, a lot of movies that I love are specifically interlinked with their soundtracks. And City of the Living Dead is a movie that I just can't imagine having worked with another soundtrack. That's how perfectly they go together. So that's that. Next couple, I'm just going to kind of flash real quick. Two more that I've never shown by the same artist. Got Tangerine Dream with their soundtrack to the movie Thief. This is Electric Press. It's an original. Real basic J card there. Real reminiscent of like the old Maurice Sarabande tapes. Tangerine Dream. I mean, fuck. What do I really need to talk about Tangerine Dream? They're awesome. This soundtrack is another one of those movies that would never have worked with a different soundtrack because they're so fitting. They just go hand in hand. This is a little bit of a departure. It came out in '81. It's the soundtrack to Michael Mann's second movie. Actually, I want to say it's the first film that he directed. The second movie that he wrote. Starring James Caan as a fucking Chicago burglar. It's got supporting bits by fucking James Belushi, Dennis Farina, fucking Willie Nelson. It is a fantastic movie. Gritty, an atmospheric film to the nines. As far as this music goes, it's less 70s Tangerine Dream. There's a lot of rhythm here. There aren't the ambient drones that a lot of Tangerine Dream's early releases were. You know, I would almost say imagine fucking Joe Satriani through like a Popolda filter, for lack of a better way of describing it. Anyway, amazing soundtrack. Then we have the Tangerine Dream soundtrack to William Friedkin's Sorcerer from 1977. This is probably my single favorite soundtrack of all time. Top 5 for sure, along with that City of the Living Dead. It's an MCA cassette, another original. That's how they did it back then. Another very bare bones J card. That's, again, 77. That's how they did it. As far as the movie goes, Sorcerer, if you haven't seen it, it is a loose remake of the French film The Wages of Fear, which is also fucking excellent. Actually, I shouldn't even say it's a loose remake. It's pretty fucking tit for tat. Great, gritty fucking drama thriller starring fucking Roy Scheider and a bunch of fucking genre dudes coming from like Italy and Germany, South America, filmed in the Amazon. What's so incredible about this soundtrack is that Tangerine Dream was approached by William Friedkin to do the soundtrack for this film before he even started shooting. Which you wouldn't think is too uncommon, but it actually is not the usual for a lot of these directors, especially some of the grittier, like 70s mavericks like Friedkin and fucking Walter Hill, James Cameron even, who I'll be fucking talking about a little bit later, to fucking start doing a movie and then halfway through the production start worrying about a soundtrack. So they were asked to basically score this movie due to other obligations that they had in the studio, sight unseen. So they had no visual cues to go off of. They only had a synopsis. The synopsis of which is an oil field in the jungle fucking catches on fire. And it can't be extinguished, and so some workers in a work camp are recruited to drive these fucking ancient trucks on these roads that make ice road trucker roads look like fucking well-regulated freeways through the Amazon, loaded with this ancient TNT that's super fragile and ready to explode. So it's incredibly tense, really gritty. It's not an action movie, but it is action packed. It's so good. I could gush about it for forever. I love it. I've seen it more times than I want to say I've seen fucking Predator, which is a lot. At any rate, Tangerine Dream only had that synopsis to go off of for their soundtrack. They weren't able to time their cues with anything going on in the movie. Nonetheless, this album works perfectly with that movie. And again, the movie did not have this soundtrack if they'd gone to, like, say, Jerry Goldsmith or fucking, any of those old school dudes. It wouldn't have been the same. It would not have come out sounding the same at all. Fantastic. Highest recommendation right here, for sure. Anyway, enough gushing about that shit. Been a while. Wow, the next one that I have written down to actually talk about, I don't have out here. And rather than pause this shit and go and grab it, I'm just going to move on to the next fucking, the next thing. And that is, who's going to talk about soundtracks without mentioning Basil Poledouris, Conan the Barbarian. This is another one of my top 5 right here. This is an original on fucking MCA. They just repressed this a couple years back. A few YouTubers have shown it. You've got the OG MCA labels there. This record is amazing. It works on so many levels beyond just being a soundtrack to one of the greatest fucking sword and sandal movies of all time, to being just something great for background music. I can't begin to try and count back the amount of times that in my youth we played D&D campaigns, listening to this soundtrack. I mean, just fucking look at that. If you haven't seen Conan the Barbarian, I'm not even going to really go into details about the movie because it should just be kind of a fucking gimme. Directed by fucking John Milius, 1982 or 81, somewhere around there, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sandal Bergman. Schwarzenegger, who, fucking, this launched his career, this movie right here. It kind of didn't do much for her career. She would later be the villain in Red Sonja and star opposite Rowdy Roddy Piper in Hell Comes to Frogtown. As far as this soundtrack goes, though, it is an absolutely breathtaking, pummeling, percussive, driving masterpiece of orchestral music. Fucking Anvil of Chrome starts it off. It's amazing. Riddle of Steel, Riders of Doom is probably the cue that most people are familiar with when they hear it. Fucking perfect music, especially for the film. This is another one. Without this soundtrack, this movie would not have worked. Just fucking fantastic stuff. The reissue probably shouldn't be too hard to come by or too expensive. These are getting up there, especially if you find one in really good shape. Mine's a bit warped, which I gotta fix. I've had it for a while now, and it plays fine. It's just one of those concave warps. Anyway, it's another composer I'm going to talk about two from. Second one being almost just as iconic, RoboCop. Basil Poledouris. This is a Greek, Basil Poledouris is Greek. This is a Brazilian pressing of this album. Vries Sarabande, which was like the soundtrack label. They're still pressing stuff too. Also SBK, I want to say co-released, distributed in South America. RoboCop's another one of those movies I'm not going to really talk much about, other than to say, if you haven't seen RoboCop, stop watching me and go watch RoboCop. Probably one of the best science fiction action movies ever made. Defining role for Peter Weller as RoboCop. Many people have said that they can't imagine any other actor in this role. I wholeheartedly agree. I think Peter Weller, around this time, was a fucking national treasure as far as thespians go. And I'm not shitting you. I'm not being facetious. I'm not being snarky or sarcastic. Amazing actor, amazing presence, amazing performances, not just in RoboCop, but everything he's in. As far as the soundtrack goes, what's really great about this is that it retains some of the like commercial bits that you hear in the movie, like the "I'd buy that for $1," as well as some of the advertisements and the news announcements that come on the television or the radio while the movie is playing out. As far as the orchestrations themselves, fantastic. Absolutely masterfully composed. And a perfect match for this movie. This is another one. I urge you to see RoboCop if you haven't, and to check out this soundtrack. It's perfect. This was repressed not too long ago, and that's probably easier to find than that particular pressing. But I mean, Discogs is your friend, you know. If you don't use fucking Discogs, you're calling yourself a collector. I'm just talking shit. Anyway, go ahead and follow up RoboCop with another masterpiece. This, I want to say, was just available for the first time on vinyl last year or the year before. I'm talking about Brad Fiddel's Terminator soundtrack. This is on Milan NNR. I forget what the NNR stands for, but that's who actually repressed that RoboCop. NNR is a distribution label that works with like Nicholas Refn, the director like Drive and Valhalla Rising and fucking Pusher Trilogy. At any rate, they put out a few soundtracks, including this RoboCop soundtrack, or not this Terminator soundtrack and the RoboCop soundtrack. But I'm not talking about RoboCop anymore. Fuck. This fucking release is beautiful, although my complaint is that the records do not properly fit in the fucking record, which is kind of a pet peeve, but I'm not usually a big sucker for color pressings, but this is fucking gorgeous. I honestly have never seen a record treated with this type of color variation. There's like 3 or 4 different colors in there, and the swirl is just done perfectly. It's kind of reddish on that particular LP, and bluish silver on this one. Excellent release. Sounds so much better. I'm pretty sure they remastered it than the fucking old CD version that was available or cassette version that was available. This was not a cheap record, but it was worth every penny. Brad Fiddel's soundtrack to the Terminator is iconic. I mean, from the main title theme to, you know, every fucking song on here is awesome. It's so iconic that Brad Fiddell also composed the T2 soundtrack and basically just recycled cues from this for that one. And that one's masterful too, but you know, without this, it wouldn't exist. Not just the soundtrack, but the fucking movie. Terminator. If Terminator were playing out to a soundtrack done by somebody like fucking Giorgio Moroder, it wouldn't have worked. It would have worked. It had the same like visual sensibility as like one of those Italian fucking ripoffs from the early '80s, like Terminator 2, Aliens, which was a fucking Terminator ripoff and Aliens ripoff at the same time. Sounds cooler than it actually is. At any rate, fantastic. Another one that I can't gush about enough. So, next thing I want to talk about, another tape actually. It's the soundtrack to Aliens, composed by James Horner. This is going to go long, guys, so I apologize, but hopefully you get something out of it. Newer pressing, there are actually 2 cassette pressings. This is the easier one to find, although both are kind of scarce these days. Amazing soundtrack to an amazing movie. Aliens, it's another James Cameron movie. I just showed Terminator, so I figured follow it up with this. This movie is another one which has kind of an interesting story behind the soundtrack as that Sorcerer one does. Where I said that a lot of directors waited until the last minute to start working with a composer or even looking for a composer. So in this case, Cameron and the producer, I want to say it was Gail Ann Hurd. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure she was one of the main producers of the film. Fucking kind of waited until like the last minute to hire James Horner. And they were still shooting. They were on a tight fucking schedule. So when they brought him on, they had something like 5 or 6 weeks to finish the production of the film. And so he basically took what he could see that they had to show him, and then kind of constructed his cues around that. But the fucked up thing is that like Cameron is such a fucking power hungry, fucking just like kind of an egomaniacal director, based off of not just my impression of him based off of interviews and whatnot, but based off of what a lot of people have said in interviews, at least in the 80s. And so he would take it. He would get a take. He'd give it to Horner to work around with, and then Horner would give it back, and then Cameron would go edit the shit out of it, which basically took it out of sync with any of the cues that Horner was able to compose. It got to the point of frustration that Horner nearly quit, and then at the same time was nearly fired for his insistence that James Cameron was just fucking him over with trying to get a fucking intelligible score out in time for the movie's release. So it's kind of impressive that the soundtrack works as well as it does with the movie. And it does. It's fantastic. I can't think of a more atmospheric soundtrack that goes perfectly from absolute terrifying ambience to just the bombast to match the fucking action set pieces that happen in Aliens. And if I have to talk to you about Aliens, of everything that I've talked about up to now, just, like I said, turn this shit off, go watch Aliens. Then watch RoboCop, and watch Conan. Get up to speed. And again, I've got two from James Horner to talk about. The second one being, find it here, his soundtrack to Gorky Park. Gorky Park is a 1983 film directed by Michael Apted, based off of a book by Martin Cruz Smith, who wrote a series of novels based around the main character of Gorky Park in the movie played by William Hurt. Gorky Park is kind of different than anything else that I've talked to you about tonight. Stills from the movie, you've got William Hurt, Lee Marvin, fantastic cast to this movie. Beyond Lee Marvin and William Hurt, you've got Brian Dennehy. Awesome movie. Super intense. It's a thriller that Hollywood would never make now. As far as the plot for Gorky Park goes, I don't want to get too into it because it's pretty fucking involved. It involves a murder of 3 American tourists in Gorky Park in Moscow, and the investigation that goes into finding the killer. It's not an action film. It's not a horror movie. It's not science fiction. It's just a straight up thriller, and it's fantastic. I love it so much. I've got it. I've got the movie. I've got the book. Read both the book and watched the movie more times than count on both hands. It's great. It was a main staple for me in my teenage years. The book in my backpack, along with anything by fucking Lovecraft and what have you. It's always people off a little bit, but whatever. So the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is fucking Drock. Music inspired by Mega City 1. This is an unofficial soundtrack. It was actually originally intended to be the soundtrack to the movie Dread, which came out... Fuck, when did that come out? I wrote it down. Let's see... 2012? It was performed by Jeff Barrow and Ben Salisbury. Jeff Barrow of Portishead. Neat fact, this is all the equipment used to make this album. That is an Oberheim synth. I actually used a virtual software version of this synth on the split that I did with Bog Family a while back. So it's obviously based off of that, inspired by Judge Dredd. And like I said, it was supposed to be the soundtrack to Dredd. I'm super bummed that it was not the one that the studio chose to go with. Because the soundtrack they picked was, it works all right. But after hearing this, it's just so cool to imagine what it would have been like. Because this soundtrack is fucking fantastic. They channel equal parts John Carpenter and fucking Alan Howarth. You know, of course, there's Nas, the Tangerine Dream, Vangelis. But it is so dingy and cold sounding. It's like, if you've heard the soundtrack to the movie Street Trash, which I've talked about that soundtrack before, imagine that, but instead of being for a horror film or an exploitation film, for some fucking hard R-rated science fiction. Awesome. Everything about this is rad. And like I said, it's just so cool to hear this and just kind of imagine what it would have been like placed over the movie that we got in 2012, which is another movie that fucking rules. You know, I don't have much to say about it beyond that. It's amazing. I really hope they get around to doing a sequel. And then I've got two more. Jesus Christ. This is going to be like a 45-minute video. So if you can make it to the end, kudos. Actually, you know what? I'm going to fucking probably announce a contest with my next video. And I'll talk a little bit about that after this is over. So maybe that's enough to keep you fucking sticking around. In terms of soundtracks that were supposed to be and never ended up happening, this record was a grail for a really long time, and I'm talking about Coil's unreleased themes for Hellraiser. This fucking record. It's elusive, it's hard to find, harder to find at a good price. I managed to score this cheap comparatively. It is a very bare bones release. They have 3 cuts that were intended to go on the Hellraiser soundtrack before they were basically fired. The B-side are tracks off of their Unnatural Resources album, so it's just music basically intended to be used for like commercials and shit. However, that's not the reason you buy this. You buy this for the 3 cuts on the A-side that was supposed to be on the Hellraiser soundtrack. There would have been more, of course, had they been allowed to flesh out a full, living, breathing soundtrack to Clive Barker's film. They were, in fact, Barker's first choice for the soundtrack. Nice little blurb from Clive about Coil right there. And what he says is absolutely true, especially during their era. This has such a different tone than the soundtrack that we actually got for Hellraiser. And I'm not complaining, because I love the soundtrack that we got for Hellraiser. But I love this as well. It is fucking industrial and gritty. The tone of what Coil managed to kind of evoke with their music on these 3 tracks so perfectly fits the aesthetic that Clive Barker had for like the Cenobites and for the stage design and the set design and the tone of the movie and the atmosphere. Perfect. I don't know what the studio was thinking, because they were letting Barker basically have carte blanche, except for this, when it came to production of Hellraiser. I think they just got nervous and they wanted a composer with a name. At any rate, really great. Again, kind of hard to scare up these days, but worth it if you can find it. As far as that composer that the studio ended up going with, talking about Christopher Young. This is a 2017 reissue of the Hellraiser soundtrack. It is really well done by Lakeshore Records, who also did, they've done a lot of soundtracks, but the only other thing I think of by them is the Baskin soundtrack. Nice little hype up there at the top. I like it because it kind of reminds me of the old Varese Sarabon records. 30th anniversary edition, came out in '87. Remastered from the 24-track master tapes. Great treatment of the record layout. Nice gatefold. I fucking love that. And of course, inside you've got printed in a sleeve. Kirsty with Uncle Frank. And the color is perfect for the fucking movie. It's this blood splatter red, black. It's fantastic. Love that. I love the soundtrack. It also works so well with the movie. And I think at this point is so like ingrained in the consciousness of the people who love the movie that they couldn't imagine it with another soundtrack. But that's probably because they haven't heard the Coil cuts. In a perfect world, there'd be two versions of Hellraiser. One would have the Christopher Young score, and the other one would have the Coil score. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world. Anyway, last movie I'm going to talk to you about, where I'm going to put it. Fucking Dust Devil. This is a DVD. Why am I showing a DVD, you may be asking? Well, get used to it. However, this is an Ultimate Collection DVD. It's kind of ridiculous. It has 5 discs, and the last disc of which is the soundtrack. The soundtrack was released as standalone when the movie came out, composed by Simon Boswell, a name that probably doesn't mean much to you unless you guys are Richard Stanley freaks, like I am. He composed the soundtrack to Hardware. So if you're familiar with his Hardware score, you might have a little bit of a starting point from what to expect in the Dust Devil score. He also did the scores for Michelle Soavi's Stage Fright. And I'm blanking on the other shit that he had a hand on in releasing. At any rate, the best of them are Stage Fright, Dust Devil, and Hardware. On this, he channels equal parts Ennio Morricone from the fucking Man with No Name movies, the fucking Sergio Leone trilogies, or Sergio Corbucci movies, or Enzo Castellari westerns. Any of those fucking old spaghetti westerns, even fucking, if you're talking about like the couple westerns Umberto Lenzi had a hand in, Ruggero Deodato, or fucking wow, I just completely spaced on that last one. Anyway, I digress. Lucio Fulci did a few spaghetti westerns, great stuff. So channels equal parts Morricone with like Popova influences, fucking Tangerine Dream influences, of course. But there's also industrial elements in here. And Boswell, Richard Stanley, they worked pretty closely with, or they were in contact with fucking like Fields of the Nephilim. So you can hear an influence from them on the soundtrack here. It's very ambient. Since the movie itself, as I said, it's directed by Richard Stanley. It came out in '92. The original cut that was available on VHS is kind of a fucking disaster, but it's gorgeous. It's beautifully shot. It is an equal part Western, slasher, exorcist movie. So imagine that fucking mashed up, done by a fucking cyberpunk movie director, because that was kind of Richard Stanley's mentality at the time. But he was also really into the occult and metaphysics and Aleister Crowley type shit. So you get this, fucking Richard Blake. I can't think of his name. Where is it? Robert John Burke. He's a character actor. He was in Stephen King's Thinner, as well as fucking one of the RoboCop movies. I think RoboCop 3. Maybe RoboCop 2. No, I think it was RoboCop 3. Which is fucking awful. Don't watch that. Do watch fucking Dust Devil. Fantastic movie. Also co-stars Zeke Smoke-Eye from, you recognize him from Serpent and the Rainbow that fucking Wes Craven directed back in like '88. '89 with Bill Pullman. At any rate, Simon Boswell's score, fantastic. I can't say enough words about it. Anyway, I'm at the 45-minute mark, folks, which is probably officially the longest fucking video that I've done. Like I said, if you stuck with me this whole time, I appreciate it. Comment down below. I'll fucking respond. I might not put any links down below because do your own fucking homework. As far as the channel goes, I do want to do a giveaway, and it's going to be movie related, and I'm going to announce it in my next video. With any luck, if my motivation stays where it is now, next week, count on it. 2 weeks from now at the latest. And it's going to be a good one, I think, especially for you people who enjoy fucking collecting dead formats as movies goes. So, yeah, thank you for watching. Again, if you stuck with me for this entire 46-minute stretch, thank you seriously, sincerely for watching. Fucking hit me up. Talk to me about some fucking soundtracks. Anyway, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Peace out, YouTube. Take care.